They say you don't really notice how quiet your house is until someone else leaves it. When my wife Amy packed her suitcase for her business trip to Denver, I remember thinking how nice it would be to have a few nights of pure stillness. No schedules, no talk about bills or errands, no TV shows I didn't like, just me, the dog, and a frozen pizza. I'm 30, a construction foreman, and the kind of guy who doesn't need much. Our place isn't big. One-story beige siding, small yard, and a wooden fence that needs repainting. We bought it 3 years ago in a quiet neighborhood outside Cleveland. Most of the neighbors are older folks who keep to themselves. Across the street lives Mr. Linton, a retired electrician who's probably in his late 70s. He's lived there forever. His wife passed a few years back, and since then he's been the sort of man who mows his lawn at the same time every Saturday and waves without smiling. Amy left Friday morning. That night, Toby, my golden retriever, followed me from room to room like a furry shadow. We ate pizza, watched a dumb action movie, and crashed on the couch. Around midnight, Toby lifted his head and gave a low growl toward the front window. I muted the TV and listened, just the faint shuffle of leaves outside, probably raccoons. "Hey," I whispered, scratching his ears. "It's okay, boy," he settled, but not completely. His eyes stayed on the window. When I looked, I caught a flash of movement, curtain shifting across the street. Behind it, a thin outline stood still. Mr. Linton's house, I laughed softly. Guess he's checking on me, but something about how motionless he stood gave me a chill. His curtain barely moved, yet his face, or what I thought was his face, remained visible in the glow of a street light. I shut my blinds and went to bed, telling myself old people get lonely, that maybe he just couldn't sleep. I woke up once around 3 to the sound of Toby packing. I thought it was thunder at first, but the sky was clear. Then came a faint scratching metal on wood. The back door. When I checked the camera feed on my phone, my stomach turned cold. Someone stood in the yard just beyond the motion light. A tall silhouette, head tilted, hands hanging at the sides. Even in the grainy night vision, I recognized the outline. Mr. Linton. I froze, heart thudding in my ears. He wasn't moving, just standing there holding something long and dark in one hand. I called out softly, "Hey, Mr. Linton." No response. I grabbed the baseball bat from the hall closet, keeping my eyes on the screen. Then the doorbell rang once, sharp and echoing through the quiet house. When the police arrived, there was nothing, just muddy footprints by the back step leading toward his property. They knocked on his door, and after a few minutes, the lights came on inside. Linton answered wearing slippers and a robe, blinking like they'd woken him. He told them he'd been asleep, that he didn't know what they were talking about. The officers exchanged a look, apologized, and left. The next morning, as I took Toby for a walk, Linton waved from his porch. His smile was small, apologetic. "Sorry about last night," he said. "I thought I saw someone else in your window. I guess I was mistaken." "Someone else?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, "a man standing behind you." I felt the back of my neck prickle. "That's odd, nobody else was here." He just nodded, shuffled back inside, and shut his door. That night, as I sat watching TV again, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. "New face detected, Mark Evans." I frowned. I was upstairs. When I opened the feed, the camera showed a man standing in the living room. Same build, same hair, same face. My face. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. The image on the screen showed my living room perfectly clear. Time stamped at 9:46 p.m. The man in the frame stood near the coffee table facing the camera, his head tilted slightly, expression blank. It was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. The lighting flickered as the camera adjusted, and for a split second the figure turned its head toward the hallway. My hallway. I grabbed the bat again and crept downstairs, heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed off the walls. Toby stayed behind me, hackles raised, growling deep in his throat. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. "Hello?" My voice cracked a little. "If anyone's here," I called the police. Silence, only the soft hum of the refrigerator. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the back door locked, every window latched. The place was empty. When I went back upstairs and replayed the feed, the figure was gone. The app flagged the motion as unidentified activity and labeled the timestamp in red. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, the tick of the baseboard heater, the bark of a dog down the street, made me sit up. I checked the camera again and again until dawn broke through the blinds. At breakfast, I called Amy. I didn't want to worry her, but I needed to hear her voice. "Everything okay?" she asked, half asleep. "Yeah, just weird stuff happening. The camera's acting up, I think." "You and that thing?" she chuckled. "You spend more time staring at those feeds than watching TV." "Yeah, maybe," I said, though my hands were shaking slightly. After hanging up, I decided to go talk to Linton. The man was old, but maybe he'd seen something. Maybe this was some prank gone wrong. When I knocked, he didn't answer. Through the side window, I saw movement inside, his curtain fluttering. Then the sound of a chair scraping the floor. "Mr. Linton," I called. "It's Mark from across the street." The door opened just a crack. His eye peered through. "You shouldn't come here," I frowned. "Sir, there's something in your house," he whispered. "It looks like you, but it isn't." The door shut, the lock clicked. I stood on his porch for a minute, listening to the quiet hum of cicadas starting up in the trees. My pulse thudded in my ears. When I turned back toward my own yard, I noticed something strange on the front window. A smudge, almost a handprint in the dust. When I stepped closer, I saw there were two side by side, both identical in size to my own hands. That evening, I called a friend from work, Eric, to come over. He was a tech guy, the kind who loved troubleshooting anything digital. When I explained what happened, he laughed at first. "Dude, it's probably a glitch. Those smart cameras sometimes double image during low light." Glitches don't make handprints, I muttered. Eric checked the system anyway. We went through the feed frame by frame. At first, nothing seemed off until we reached the clip from 9:46 again. Wait, he said, zooming in. That's weird, the shadow behind him, see it? Doesn't match your lamps. It's longer, like the light's coming from a different angle. What do you mean? I mean, he said slowly. Whatever this is wasn't captured by your camera the normal way. It's like it was already inside the feed before the light hit it. Could someone hack the camera? He hesitated. Maybe, but that takes skill, and why? To freak you out. We sat in silence. Then Toby started barking again, low and angry, facing the front door. Eric went pale. Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. I checked the peephole, nothing, but when I opened the door I saw it, muddy footprints leading from the curb to the porch, barefoot human. We followed them down the driveway until they stopped at the street right in front of Linton's mailbox. Man, Eric whispered, call the cops again. The officers came, checked both properties, and left with the same puzzled expression as before. No sign of forced entry, no trespasser, could be kids, could be an animal track, just keep your lights on. That night I left every lamp burning. I sat in the living room with Toby asleep beside me, eyes glued to the live feed on my phone. At 2:18 a.m. the camera blinked, static for a second. Then the image returned. My double was standing outside the window staring in. I called 911 again. By the time the cruiser arrived, the figure was gone. But I noticed Linton's house lights flickering like a strobe. The officer went over, knocked, and this time no one answered. The next morning I saw the front door of his house ajar. Against every instinct I crossed the street. Mr. Linton. The living room smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. His recliner sat turned toward the window. In front of it the floor was scuffed, like someone had dragged their feet in circles. On the wall above his TV, photos hung crooked. Most of him and a woman I assumed was his late wife. But one frame caught my eye, a Polaroid of a man standing in this very room. Same build, same face, mine. My throat went dry. The back door was open, curtains fluttering in the wind. On the porch steps, muddy footprints bare, matching the ones from last night. When I got home, the living room camera was offline. The app read, feed unavailable, device already in use. Then my phone buzzed again. New face detected. Mark Evans. But this time the location listed wasn't my living room. It was the camera at Linton's house. By dusk, I decided to disconnect everything. I tore the cameras off the walls, pulled the plugs, tossed them in a box. But when I looked out the window, I saw movement in Linton's yard. A man standing near the fence, half in shadow. I yelled, stay where you are, and ran outside. He didn't move. When I got closer, I realized he wasn't facing me. He was facing my house. Profile caught in the light, and I froze. It was like staring at my reflection in a mirror. Same jawline, same clothes, even the scar on my chin from when I was 12. What do you want? I shouted. He turned slowly. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Then in a voice that seemed to echo from everywhere, he said, you're standing in the wrong house. Before I could respond, the floodlight blinked and he vanished. The police searched again. No sign of anyone. Linton was declared missing 2 weeks later. They found his robe on the porch, but nothing else. Amy came home the next day. I didn't tell her everything, just that there had been a weird break-in. We sold the house that summer. Sometimes, though, I still get notifications from the old camera app. The system was never officially removed. The last one came last month. New face detected. Mark Evans. Timestamp 30 a.m. Location 118 Riverbend Lane, our old address. Trust your instincts even when logic tells you not to. Sometimes danger doesn't break down the door. It stands quietly wearing your own reflection. There's something comforting about the way the countryside smells at dusk. Damp earth, pine needles, and the faint sweetness of hay carried on the wind. I used to hate it growing up, the silence and the isolation. But as I got older, that quiet started to feel like a rare kind of peace. So when Mom called and said, you should come home for the weekend, Hannah, your dad misses you, I packed a bag and drove the 2 hours out of the city without hesitation. The house sat where it always had, tucked at the end of a gravel road surrounded by oak trees that looked older than time. My younger brother Mason still lived there while finishing his online classes. He met me at the door, taller now but still with that same goofy grin. City girl returns, he teased, grabbing my bag. You bring any real coffee, or are we still drinking Dad's instant sludge? Dad was already in the backyard, stacking logs in the fire pit. Toby, the old family dog, barked and bounded up to me, tail wagging so hard his whole body swayed. It felt good to be home. The kind of good that made you forget why you ever left. We ate burgers off the grill, laughed about stupid memories, and for the first time in months I felt the weight of city life slide off my shoulders. The fire crackled, the stars blinked awake, and Mason roasted marshmallows with the patience of a scientist. Mom had gone inside to finish a phone call, leaving the three of us outside, faces glowing in the firelight. That's when Toby started barking. At first it was just a single bark, sharp, curious. Then another, louder, more urgent. His body stiffened, tail straight, eyes fixed on the tree in behind the old swing set. What's he barking at? Mason asked, glancing toward the woods. Probably a raccoon, Dad said. Though his voice lost its easy calm, he reached for his flashlight on the patio table and shined it toward the trees. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating trunks and branches, but then it caught something else. A tall figure stood just behind the swing set, motionless. My breath caught. The man didn't move, didn't speak. His head was tilted slightly to one side like he was studying us. Hey, Dad called, stepping forward. Who's there? The light wavered slightly in his hand, and just as it hit the figure full on, the man was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "He just disappeared." Dad frowned. "Probably someone messing around." "Mason, take Toby inside." But Mason didn't move. "Dad, he was right there." We searched for another 5 minutes, calling out, circling the yard, shining the light along the fence. Nothing, not a footprint, not a sound. "Let's get inside," Dad finally said. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. That night the wind picked up. The old house creaked the way it always did, but every sound felt amplified. I lay awake listening, telling myself I was just jumpy. Then softly, almost politely, there came a knock on the window beside my bed. 3 slow taps. I froze, breath caught in my chest. The sound didn't come again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just outside, waiting for me to move. Morning sunlight made everything look harmless again. Mason teased me about my city paranoia, and Dad acted like nothing unusual had happened. Still, when I went into the kitchen for coffee, I saw them. Smears on the glass doors facing the backyard. Muddy handprints, long and uneven, like someone had pressed their palms against the window during the night. "Dad," I called quietly. "Come look at this." He set his mug down and joined me, his face tight. "Don't tell your mom. What if someone was out there again? We'll check it out." He stepped outside while I stayed at the door. The morning dew glistened across the yard, but near the porch, a single wet footprint marked the wooden step. Bare, human, and facing the house. Dad crouched to look closer. "That wasn't there yesterday." Dad crouched to look closer. "That wasn't there yesterday." "Shouldn't we call the police?" I asked. He hesitated, then sighed. "We will if anything else happens." When the sheriff arrived later that afternoon, he was polite but unconcerned. "Could have been a hiker," he said. "Folks cut through those woods sometimes. I'll have a deputy patrol the area tonight." That didn't reassure me much. After he left, I walked out to the swing set, the same one Mason and I used to play on as kids. The chains squeaked in the breeze. A few feet behind it, the ground was disturbed. Patches of dirt scuffed like someone had stood there recently. That night, Mom insisted we all sleep early. "The sheriff will keep watch," she said. No point losing sleep over shadows. But when darkness fell again, the feeling returned, that prickling awareness of being watched. Around midnight, I woke to Toby growling softly at my bedroom door. The moonlight pulled through the curtains, silver and cold. Then came the tapping. This time it wasn't soft. It was steady, deliberate, moving from one window pane to the next. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I approached the window. Outside, between the reflection of my own face and the dark beyond, I saw him. The same tall man, head tilted, eyes hidden in shadow. I screamed. Dad came running, baseball bat in hand. By the time he yanked the curtains open, the man was gone again. Toby barked furiously, pawing at the window. "We're calling the police," Dad said, voice low but firm. The deputies arrived within 10 minutes. They swept the yard, the woods, even the shed. Once again, nothing. No sign of trespass, the sheriff said, frowning. "Could be local kids pulling a prank." "Kids don't leave handprints taller than Dad," Mason muttered. They promised to keep a cruiser near the road, but by the time their tail lights disappeared, unease settled heavier than ever. The next day, Dad installed motion lights and cameras around the porch. He didn't say it, but I could tell he was shaken. Mom pretended it was all just nerves, but she kept glancing at the windows like they might come alive. That evening, I scrolled through the new camera feed on Dad's laptop. Nothing for hours until 11:57 p.m. The screen flickered and a tall shape appeared near the trees. The motion sensor light clicked on, but the man didn't move. He just stood there watching the house, his face completely blank. Then the feed went black. When it came back, the camera was pointed at the ground, mud, and a single bare footprint facing the lens. By Saturday, we were exhausted. Mom wanted to pack up and leave for a motel, but Dad refused. "This is our house," he said. "Whoever it is won't scare us out." That night, clouds swallowed the moon. The woods were a black wall behind the house. Inside, every creak made me jump. Mason stayed awake on the couch with Toby while Dad patrolled between rooms like a sentry. Around 2:00 in the morning, the motion light flicked on outside. Dad grabbed his flashlight and looked through the window. "There," he hissed. I peeked beside him and saw the man again. He was standing on the swing set, 1 foot on each seat, perfectly balanced, head still tilted. Even from here, I could feel the wrongness radiating off him. He didn't move when Dad opened the door. He didn't move when the flashlight hit him full in. Then suddenly he was gone. We searched the whole yard, nothing but wind and the distant hoot of an owl. When we came back inside, the front door was wide open. Morning came gray and heavy. No one spoke during breakfast. The house felt different, emptier somehow, like something had been taken without us noticing. When I went to pack, I glanced out the window. The swing set was gone. Only the metal posts remained, bent inward like they'd been crushed by something massive. My stomach twisted. Before we left, Dad checked the porch camera one last time. The final clip was timestamped 3:12 a.m. It showed the front door slowly opening on its own. Then a single wet footprint appeared on the wood, larger than any of ours and facing into the house. We drove back to the city that afternoon. None of us talked about what we saw. Even now, weeks later, I dream of that tilted head and those quiet, deliberate footsteps in the leaves. Sometimes when I wake in my apartment, I swear I hear tapping at the window. 3 slow, patient knocks. Fear often begins where certainty ends. Listen to your instincts. Protect those you love. And never dismiss the quiet warnings that come in the dark. Because not every watcher in the woods is just imagination. I've never been much for Halloween. Kids dressed as zombies, fake cobwebs in every bush, neighbors competing for who can hang the creepiest skeleton. It all feels forced. When you're 35, single, and living in a quiet suburb where the loudest thing after 9:00 p.m. is your own refrigerator, October 31st is just another night. That year was no different. I ordered Chinese, opened a beer, and queued up a couple of old black and white horror movies. The kind with visible strings on the bats and villains that hissed instead of spoke. My kind of comfort. Outside, the street was practically dead. Most families had moved years ago. The rest kept their lights off to avoid trick-or-treaters. By 9:00, the movie's flickering light was the only glow in the living room. Toby, my golden retriever, was asleep at my feet, twitching in his dreams. Everything felt peaceful. Then the doorbell rang. It startled me more than it should have. The sound cut through the quiet, sharp and echoing. I paused the movie, listened, nothing else. I glanced at Toby, who lifted his head but didn't bark. Probably a late trick-or-treater, I thought. I didn't have candy, but I figured I could at least tell them to move along. When I looked through the peephole, the porch was empty. The street beyond was still. The wind brushed a few leaves across the sidewalk. That was it. I frowned and waited a few seconds. Nothing. I shrugged it off and went back to the couch. Then the bell rang again. 3 quick chimes this time. Ding dong ding, each one louder than the last. Toby barked, tail stiff. I hurried back to the door and looked through the peephole again. No one. I opened the door halfway and peered out. Cold air met my face. My porch light buzzed overhead and my front yard was still empty. "Hello," I called out. "If this is a prank, it's not funny." Silence. When I closed the door, I noticed something strange. The faint echo of the doorbell was still ringing even though I wasn't touching the switch. A soft electrical hum like it was coming from inside the wall. I tried the chime box, then the breaker still humming. So I pulled the faceplate off and unplugged the wires. For a few seconds it stopped, then so faint I almost thought I imagined it. I heard it again. Ding, ding, ding. The sound wasn't coming from the doorbell anymore. It was coming from somewhere deeper inside the wall, like it had sunk there. That's when the lights flickered, once, twice. Then every bulb in the house went dim, then back up again. My smart bulb synced to my phone, but I wasn't touching anything. Toby started barking again, facing the front door. I checked my phone's security app. The front camera feed popped up, grainy and jittery, but there was someone standing there. A person in a vintage clown mask. White face, faded red nose, glassy black eyes. They didn't move, just stood still right in the middle of the porch, staring straight into the camera. I froze. The video feed was live. Timestamp 9:26 p.m. I stared for a full minute, waiting for the figure to move. It didn't. The clown stood completely still, arms at its sides like a photograph come to life. I unmuted the feed. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, just the faint hum of my outdoor light. Toby growled low in his throat. "Okay," I muttered, more to calm myself than him. "It's just some idiot in a costume." I opened the front door an inch. The porch light was bright, but the space was empty. When I looked back at my phone, the clown was still there on the screen. The time stamp hadn't changed. It was like the footage had frozen, except the time counter kept ticking. That's when the doorbell chimed again. I slammed the door shut. Nope, not tonight. The bell rang once more, muffled, like someone was pressing it gently, testing. I turned on every light in the house. When I called 911, my voice shook harder than I wanted it to. "There's someone on my porch dressed like a clown. I have camera footage." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Stay inside, sir. Officers are on their way. Please tell them to hurry." It felt like hours, but the flashing blue lights appeared in less than 10 minutes. 2 officers swept the porch, the yard, the driveway. One of them, Officer Daniels, knocked on my door. "Mr. Hawkins." "Yeah, there's no one out here," he said, shining his flashlight around. "We'll check your cameras." I showed them the clip. The clown stood in perfect focus on the screen, unmoving. Daniel squinted. "You say this was live?" "Yeah, look at the timestamp." He frowned. "Where does this camera sit?" "Above the door, right there." He looked up. "Then how the hell did this happen?" "What do you mean?" Daniels rewound the footage. This time he played it at half speed. The clown didn't just vanish. It walked slowly past the camera toward the left side of the house, straight toward the basement window. The officers searched the property again. Backyard, basement door, nothing. Daniels left his card. "Call if anything else happens, but look, man, it's Halloween. People do stupid stuff. Try not to overthink it." Easy for him to say. After they left, I couldn't shake the image of that mask. Pale white, cheapo looking, but something about it felt ancient, like it didn't belong to this decade. I barely slept. Around 3:00 a.m., I woke to Toby packing near the hallway. His ears were pinned back, tail low. He was staring at the basement door. A soft sound came from behind it. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but then it came again. A faint scraping like nails or metal brushing wood. I stepped closer. Hello, silence. I turned the handle. The door was unlocked but stiff. When I pulled it open, the scraping stopped. The basement light flickered on when I hit the switch. Boxes, tools, the old furnace rumbling. Everything looked normal except for the smell. Damp metallic like soil and rust, and the small patch of mud on the concrete leading from the basement window to the stairs. I followed it until my phone buzzed in my pocket. A new notification from my smart system. Device disconnected. Front doorbell. Wiring had been cut from the inside. The next morning I tried to convince myself it was some fluke. Maybe the wiring shorted. Maybe the clown was a kid messing around. But when I stepped outside, my neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, waved me over. "Ryan, you okay, honey?" "Yeah," I lied. She pointed to the sidewalk. Muddy footprints, large ones, led from my basement window to the street. "I saw those when I walked my dog," she said. "Didn't want to scare you, but it looks like someone came out of your house." I stared at them, my stomach dropping. That night I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the living room with the baseball bat I hadn't used since high school. The dog curled at my feet. Every noise made me flinch. Around midnight, the power blinked again. My phone buzzed. Motion detected. Basement. I opened the live feed. At first, nothing. Then movement in the corner. Just the faint outline of a tall figure standing behind the water heater. No mask this time, no face visible, just the shape of someone too still, too silent. The camera glitched. When it came back, the space was empty except the small pull chain light was swinging slowly back and forth. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I packed a bag, grabbed Toby, and drove to my brother's place across town. When the electrician came later that week, he called me. "Hey man, you weren't kidding about the wires being cut." "You mean from the outside?" I asked. "No, from inside the wall. Someone had to pull the faceplate, snip the wires clean, and put it back." "Neat job too." He paused. "You sure you live alone?" I hung up without answering. I moved out 2 months later, but every Halloween when the lights dim just a little and the streets fall silent, I swear I hear it again. Faint and distant, ding dong ding, like something deep in the walls hasn't forgot. Evil doesn't always come from outside our doors. Sometimes it lives quietly within the walls we trust most. Always listen when the ordinary turns strange, because the moment you stop believing your instincts, something else starts listening for you. When my parents told me they were taking a month-long cruise to celebrate their 20th anniversary, I pretended to be bummed out, but inside I was ecstatic. 17 years old. No curfews, no chores, no "Ryan, did you feed the dog?" or "Ryan, get off the Xbox." Just me, the house, and 4 glorious weeks of freedom. They just moved us into a newer subdivision outside Columbus. Fresh paint, trimmed lawns, neighbors who waved too much. The kind of neighborhood where everyone used the same mailbox and pretended to like each other. Our house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, 2 stories of beige siding and brand new everything. The day they left, my mom kissed my forehead and gave me a list of rules. Don't let anyone inside. Lock the doors, no parties, and please don't burn the house down. Dad tossed me a 50 and said, "Pizza money, don't blow it all on video games." Then they were gone. For the first few days, I lived like a king. Mountain Dews lined the coffee table like trophies. I stayed up till 3:00 playing Call of Duty, fell asleep on the couch, and woke up at noon to the sound of my dog Scout whining for breakfast. He was a big moot with more bark than brains, but he was my only company, and I talked to him like he was a roommate. The storms rolled in during the second week, the kind that shake the windows and make the lights flicker. That's when I first heard it, a clang, metal on metal, faint but sharp, coming from the basement. I froze. Scout growled low in his throat, staring at the basement door like it had personally offended him. I muted the TV. The sound stopped. Probably the water heater, I told myself. Houses make noises. But the same thing happened the next night and the night after that. Always around 11:30 p.m., always one metallic clang like someone hitting a pipe with a wrench. By the 4th night, Scout refused to even go near the door. He'd lie on the opposite end of the living room, ears flat, eyes fixed on that spot. That's when the curiosity started eating at me. And when I finally decided to go down there, I grabbed a flashlight and my phone, trying to act brave for no one in particular. The power flickered as I reached for the basement light switch. The bulb buzzed overhead, throwing weak yellow light across the concrete steps. The basement smelled like dust and cardboard. My parents had barely unpacked down here, just stacks of boxes labeled Christmas, old files, and Misque. Everything looked normal except for Scout packing at the top of the stairs, whining like I was walking into a lion's den. Then I heard it again. Clang, this time closer behind the back wall near the storage shelves. I moved the flashlight in slow arcs, my breath catching every few seconds. That's when I noticed something odd. The shelves didn't sit flush with the wall. There was a small gap behind them, just wide enough to squeeze through. My heart was hammering. I pushed the shelves aside, boxes clattering to the floor. Behind them was a door, metal, bolted shut, scratches around the edges. Not new ones either, old deep gouges like something or someone had tried to claw their way out. "What the hell?" I whispered. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I crouched closer. The door had 4 thick bolts and no handle on this side, just a small latch for a padlock that was missing. I hesitated, then unbolted the top latch. The metal groaned, another. By the last bolt, I was sweating, every nerve screaming at me to stop. When I finally pulled it open, the smell hit me. Bleach and cold air, sharp and chemical. My stomach turned. Inside was a small windowless room. Bare concrete walls, chains bolted to the floor, and a single camera mounted in the corner, pointing directly at the door. Its red light was blinking. "Mom," I said without realizing it, my voice shaking. That's when my phone buzzed. Security app, movement detected, basement. The light overhead flickered once, twice, then everything went dark. I froze. The flashlight beam sputtered, casting long shadows across the concrete. Scout barked upstairs, claws skittering on the hardwood. I spun around, but nothing moved. Then I remembered. The house had Wi-Fi cameras my dad installed when we moved in. The notification meant the motion sensor picked something up. My phone screen glowed faintly in the dark. I opened the app. The live feed loaded, static at first, then me. I was on the screen, standing in the basement, holding my phone. But behind me in the corner of the frame, something shifted. I whipped around, nothing there. The camera blinked again. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I backed toward the stairs, every step echoing louder than the last. The smell of bleach hung heavy in the air. That's when I heard it. A breath right behind me. I ran. I didn't look back. I just bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and locked it. Scout barked like crazy, tail between his legs, circling me as I leaned against the door, shaking. I called my dad straight to voicemail. Mom's phone, same. For the next hour, I sat in the kitchen with every light on, clutching Scout like a lifeline. Nothing happened, no sounds, no motion alerts. Eventually, exhaustion won and I crashed on the couch, TV blaring late-night infomercials. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the blinds. For a second, I convinced myself it was a nightmare. Then I saw the basement door. It was open. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. I kept the basement locked and pretended everything was fine. When Mrs. Hallway, our next-door neighbor, came by with her tiny dog, I asked, "Hey, do you know if the house had any renovations before we moved in?" She frowned. "You mean the Wilson place? Oh, honey, you didn't hear what?" Her voice dropped. "The man who lived there before you, he was arrested. Police found something in his basement, said he'd been keeping women down there filming them." My skin went cold. "Filming?" I managed. She nodded, whispering like it was a church secret. "They said he had cameras everywhere. He's in prison now, I think." I mumbled something about needing to get Scout and rushed inside. The house felt different after that. Every sound, every creak made my stomach twist. That night I checked the basement feed again. Camera 1 dark, camera 2 static, camera 3 the metal room. The chains were empty, but the camera's red light was still blinking. Then movement. The door swung shut on its own and someone whispered my name through the speaker. I don't remember running, only the pounding of my feet on the floor and Scout barking nonstop. I grabbed my keys, shoved my wallet into my pocket and bolted for the door. The police didn't believe me at first. They searched the house, found nothing. No hidden door, no metal room, just plain drywall where it had been. The officers exchanged looks like I was wasting their time, but when they checked my phone, their faces changed. The footage was there, 30 seconds of me standing in the basement. The door opened behind me, and then a figure stepping out, tall, pale, wearing my dad's old work shirt. The feed ended in static. They called my parents, cut their trip short. We stayed in a hotel until they could evaluate the property. A week later, we moved out. My dad never said it, but I saw the fear in his eyes when the realtor told him the basement had been remodeled years ago. No record of any extra door. Scout still refuses to go near basement. Honestly, I don't blame him. Some doors stay closed for a reason. Curiosity is a powerful thing, but sometimes what you uncover isn't meant to be understood. There's a difference between being brave and being reckless, and learning that difference might be what keeps you alive. When I first saw the house, it looked like the perfect place to start over. Quiet street, wraparound porch, a maple tree in the yard just starting to turn red for autumn. I'd been living out of boxes for months after the breakup, floating between friends' couches and short-term rentals, trying to convince myself I was healing. The truth was, I was exhausted, tired of the city noise, tired of feeling like half a person, and tired of waking up to the same memories on repeat. So when I found the listing for a 2-bedroom fixer-upper in New Hampshire, I didn't think twice. It was old, built in the 1940s with uneven floors and floral wallpaper that peeled in the corners, but it felt solid, honest, something I could build a new life inside. My realtor, Mark, gave me a sympathetic smile when I told him I was recently single. "Fresh start," he said, handing me the keys. "Just needs a little love." The first week, I didn't mind the creaks and drafts. The house had a personality, like it was getting to know me. I spent my days sanding cabinets, painting walls, drinking too much coffee, and falling asleep on the couch watching renovation videos. At night, I'd listen to the wind tapping the shutters and the occasional rumble of a passing truck on the main road. Peaceful, safe. Then on the 10th night, I woke up to a sound. Faint but steady, creak, 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 like someone packing directly above me. My bedroom ceiling was right below the attic. I lay still, my heart beating fast, counting the seconds between each step. After a minute, it stopped. I told myself it was the old wood expanding in the cold. Or maybe a squirrel. Houses like this made noise. That's what I told myself anyway. The next morning, I almost believed it. A week later, I found the dust. I was walking toward the kitchen, half awake and desperate for coffee, when I noticed a thin trail of gray insulation sprinkled across the hallway floor, directly under the attic hatch. It wasn't there the night before. I stared up at the square panel in the ceiling. The metal latch was slightly askew. I'd never opened it since moving in, but seeing it now made my stomach tight. "Probably wind," I muttered, though the rational part of me knew the attic hatch didn't just open itself. That night I texted my friend Emma about it. "We heard noises again, Emma. It's an old house. Claire wood moves. Things settle me. There's dust on the floor under the attic hatch." Emma, "Probably mice. Just set traps." I tried to believe her. I even laughed at myself for being dramatic. But when I lay in bed that night, I couldn't sleep. The silence felt wrong, too heavy, like the air was holding its breath, and then faintly it started again. Creak, creak, creak. Packing, I reached for my phone, opened the camera, and pressed record, pointing it toward the ceiling. I don't know why, maybe I just needed proof that I wasn't losing it. I finally fell asleep sometime after 3:00 a.m. phone still recording. When I woke up, sunlight streamed through the blinds. My first thought was relief. No noise, no footsteps, nothing strange. I even laughed when I remembered the recording. Then I watched it. At 2:41 a.m. the footage showed the attic hatch trembling just slightly at first, then harder, as if someone were pushing from above. After a few seconds, one corner lifted and a small section swung open. Something lowered down, a rope ladder. The screen flickered as a bare foot appeared on the first rung. Pale adult, definitely human. Slowly a man climbed halfway down, his shadow falling across my bed. Then he stopped, head tilted, looking straight toward the camera. For a full 5 seconds he didn't move. Then he climbed back up. The hatch closed. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't breathe. It wasn't wind. It wasn't mice. Someone had been in my attic. I ran outside in my pajamas barefoot on the porch and called 911. Two officers showed up within 20 minutes. Officer Daniels, tall, calm, maybe mid-40s, listened while I explained everything, then climbed the attic ladder himself. "Ma'am," he called down after a few minutes, "you might want to stay downstairs." They found a sleeping bag in the far corner, tucked behind insulation boards. Beside it, food wrappers, bottled water, and a notebook. Daniels handed it to me in a plastic bag. "You shouldn't look through it, but it's got notes about your schedule, what time you leave, when you shower, what you cook." He paused. "We think he was coming down when you were asleep." My knees gave out. I sat on the bottom step, clutching Scout's old leash I still kept near the door for comfort, and started to cry. The other officer checked the roof and found a loose vent big enough for a person to squeeze through. They guessed he'd been living there for at least a month, maybe longer. "He's probably local," Daniel said. "Someone who noticed you moved in alone." That word alone made my stomach twist. It had always felt empowering before. Now it sounded like a warning. I moved out that week, didn't even try to sell the house myself. I just called a realtor, packed what I could fit in my car, and drove to my sister's place in Maine. The house was supposed to be my fresh start. Instead, it became a reminder that peace can be an illusion. That sometimes the quietest places hide the loudest dangers. I never watched the video again. The police kept it for evidence, though they never caught the man. Maybe he left town, maybe he didn't. Now in every apartment I've lived in since, I can't fall asleep without checking the ceilings. If I hear even the faintest creak above me, I look up. Not because I expect to see someone, but because I know how easily you can convince yourself you're safe until you're not. Sometimes starting over means realizing the world doesn't owe you peace. You have to build it yourself and guard it. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Silence and solitude can heal, but they can also hide danger. Never ignore the small signs, the ones that whisper before they scream. It all started with the snow. Thick, heavy snow that fell in slow motion. The kind that muffles sound until the world feels wrapped in cotton. When Thomas told me he'd be moving north for his new job, I tried to be excited for him. He'd been working toward that position for years, lead engineer for a private energy company. And the pay meant we could finally stop renting and start thinking about a future. But the truth was, I didn't want to leave. I was 5 months pregnant, my body changing faster than my mind could keep up. And the idea of being hours away from family or a proper hospital made my stomach twist. Still, I smiled, packed our things, and told myself this was what good wives did. They followed. The company offered temporary housing, a cabin in the mountains while we waited for our house to be ready. It wasn't a vacation cabin either, more like something built in the 1950s and forgot. But it was clean, with a wide porch that overlooked a valley and pines so tall they seemed to pierce the clouds. Thomas loved it immediately. He said it was quiet, peaceful, a good change of pace. I wanted to believe him, and for the first week I almost did. I walked the dog, our shepherd mix, Luna, along the trails, baked bread, and watched flakes of snow drift past the window like tiny ghosts. The nearest town was miles away, a little place called Ashwood with a diner, a general store, and not much else. The lodge owner, a gay-haired man named Walter, stopped by once to drop off extra firewood. "Not many folks around this time of year," he said, stomping snow off his boots. "You'll have the mountain all to yourself." He said it like a blessing, but something about the way his eyes lingered on the tree made it feel more like a warning. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the chimney, and Luna kept packing the floorboards, whining softly. Around midnight I got up for water and noticed something strange outside. Large prints in the fresh snow leading from the woods to the porch steps. They were barefoot, human-shaped. When I mentioned it to Walter the next day, he laughed it off. "Snow warps tracks," he said. "Could have been a deer or a bear. Don't go scaring yourself, Miss Naomi." But I knew what I saw. And every night after that, the silence of the mountains started to feel less like peace and more like someone holding their breath. Thomas worked long hours, often leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. He said the new job demanded it, but his absence made the cabin feel cavernous and strange. The footsteps began on the fourth night, slow, deliberate crunches in the snow outside circling the cabin. Luna would growl low in her throat and stand at the door, ears pinned back, tail rigid. I'd pull the blanket tighter around me and try to tell myself it was an animal, but animals don't stop and breathe under your window. I started keeping a fire burning through the night, even though it made the cabin stiflingly warm. The crackling flames felt like company. Every so often I'd glance toward the frosted glass panes, half expecting to see a shadow there. One morning I found the tracks again, fresh ones bigger than before, looping around the cabin in wide circles. Barefoot, always barefoot. When Thomas came home I showed him. He frowned but tried to stay calm. "Could be kids from town pulling a prank," he said. "We'll talk to Walter." Walter came by that afternoon. He crouched by the tracks, squinting. "Odd," he muttered, "but snow plays tricks on you. Melts or freezes, looks different than it is." He was lying. I could tell the way his hand trembled slightly as he brushed snow off the porch railing. It wasn't the gesture of a man seeing nothing. That night I sat awake with Luna by my feet, one hand on my stomach, listening. The steps came again, slow and patient, circling. When the clock read 2:13 a.m., the footsteps stopped right outside the front door. Luna barked, a sharp, frantic sound that made my heart hammer. I reached for the phone, but the signal was gone. Deadline. I waited for the knock that never came. By sunrise, the steps were gone, erased by new snow, but I knew someone had been there watching. Thomas took a day off that weekend, partly because he was worried, partly because he wanted to prove I was imagining things. Armed ourselves with flashlights and walked into the woods with Luna trotting ahead. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Even the birds seemed to hold back their songs. After about 20 minutes, Thomas stopped and pointed at a tree trunk. "What's that?" It was an eye carved right into the bark. A human eye, crudely etched but unmistakable. Then we saw another and another, dozens of them on trees surrounding a small clearing, all facing the same direction toward the cabin. Thomas tried to laugh it off. "Some local kids maybe, weird art project," but I could hear the strain in his voice. We went back to the cabin before dark, both pretending we weren't shaken. He promised to call the sheriff in town the next morning, though I could tell he doubted they'd take us seriously. That night the wind died completely. The silence was thick enough to choke on. I dozed on the couch with Luna curled beside me. Sometime after midnight, Luna lifted her head and growled. Low, continuous. Then she started barking loud and desperate, claws skidding on the floor as she lunged toward the window. I sat up, heart pounding, and froze. A pale hand pressed against the glass, fingers long and thin, skin almost translucent under the moonlight. The hand stayed there motionless while a slow breath fogged the glass from the outside. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I just watched the fog bloom and fade until the hand slid away into the dark. Thomas called the police at dawn. 2 officers arrived, one young, one older, both wearing that patient, skeptical look people reserve for the hysterical. They found nothing. No tracks, no fingerprints, no damage to the windows. The snow around the porch looked untouched except for the fresh prints from the officers themselves. "You said it was around midnight," the older one asked. "Snow's been falling since 2, could have covered everything." "Then look in the woods," I said, voice shaking. "There are carvings, eyes on the trees." The younger officer agreed to check. He came back 15 minutes later, pale and quiet. "Yeah," he said finally, "they're there." Walter showed up not long after. When he heard what happened, his face went gray. "Shouldn't have rented this place out again," he muttered. "Again?" Thomas asked. Walter rubbed the back of his neck. "Couple stayed here last winter, packed up early, said they felt watched. I figured it was the isolation." He looked at me, then eyes tired and sad. "Don't stay here another night. Some places remember things they shouldn't." That evening, Thomas locked every door and window. We slept in shifts, he from midnight to 3:00, me from 3:00 to sunrise. The snow outside gleamed under a full moon, perfect and untouched until morning. That's when I found it. A small wooden carving of an eye sitting on the doorstep pointed toward our bed. We left the next day. No discussion, no argument. Just packed our bags, loaded the car, and drove until the cabin was a speck behind us. As the road wound down the mountain, I watched the tree fade in the rear view mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing among the pines, tall, pale, still. But I didn't tell Thomas. Some things are better left unspoken. We stayed in a motel that night, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. No footsteps, no breathing outside the glass, just silence. A week later, the new house was ready. Brand new construction, neighbors close enough to wave to. But every night before bed, I checked the locks twice. And sometimes when the wind hits just right, I swear I can hear snow crunching somewhere far away. I don't talk about it much. Thomas says we were both under stress, that isolation and pregnancy can do strange things to the mind. Maybe he's right, maybe the mountain just played tricks on me. But sometimes when Luna growls softly at the window for no reason, I can't help but wonder if something from that mountain followed us down. Something that watches through unseen eyes. Some silences aren't peaceful, they're waiting. Isolation can make you see what others refuse to, but it can also blind you to what's real. When we ignore our instincts for the sake of logic or pride, we open the door to dangers, both human and unseen. Always trust your fear when it tells you something isn't right. Because sometimes fear is the only truth that keeps us alive. When I first saw the house on Maple Hollow Road, I thought it looked like a painting, small, white, and tidy, with a porch that caught the late afternoon light just right. It wasn't fancy, but after the chaos of my last few years, I didn't need fancy. I needed quiet. I was 34, recently divorced, and trying to start over. I'd left Chicago after the papers were signed, packed what I could into my old pickup, and drove south until I ran out of highway and big city noise. The town of Briar Ridge was small enough to feel like another era, one main street, a diner that closed at 8, and neighbors who still waved at strangers. The house sat at the edge of town where the asphalt turned into gravel and the woods began. The realtor told me it used to belong to a retired couple who'd moved in with their daughter out west. "Solid bones," she'd said, "just needs a little love." I signed the papers within a week. The day I moved in, the air smelled like cut grass and rain. By sunset, most of my boxes were stacked in the living room, and I was too tired to do anything but sit on the porch and watch the light fade behind the trees. That's when I noticed it, the basket. It was waiting right at the top of the steps. A wicker basket wrapped in clear cellophane tied with a red ribbon. Inside was a bottle of wine, a few candles, and a handwritten note that read, "Welcome to the neighborhood and come meet us soon." There was no name, no address. I smiled at first, thinking it was a kind gesture, the sort of thing people in small towns did. But something about the handwriting made me pause, slanted, uneven, almost childlike. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. After all, I'd come here for peace, not paranoia. I brought the basket inside, set it on the counter, and poured myself a glass of the wine. That night, as I unpacked boxes in the living room, I heard a sound of faint knocking. It wasn't the front door, it came from inside the wall. At first I thought it was pipes. Old houses make noises, right? But the sound wasn't random. It was rhythmic. Knock, 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 a pause. Then again I turned off the TV to listen. The sound was coming from behind the wall near the hallway, steady and deliberate. Luna, my dog, started whining, ears perked. Probably a raccoon, I muttered, though even saying it didn't convince me. I went outside with a flashlight, scanning the siding, the roof line, the crawl space. Nothing. When I came back in, the knocking had stopped. The next morning, I called a handyman named Gary who worked out of the general store. Probably mice, he said over the phone. He happens every winter. I'll swing by later in the week. I spent the rest of the day painting the kitchen and trying not to think about the sound. When I took a break that afternoon, I stepped outside and froze. Another basket sat on the porch. This one was smaller, no ribbon this time. Inside was my own house key, the spare one I kept in a magnetic box under the back steps. My hands went cold. I ran to the back of the house. Sure enough, the box was gone. I checked every lock, all intact, every window latched, every door solid. No sign of forced entry, but someone had been there. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak made me jump. Every gust of wind against the siding sounded like footsteps. By midnight, I heard it again, the knocking. Only this time it came from the ceiling. The next day I drove into town and told the local police chief, a stocky man named Dan Holloway. He listened politely, jotting a few notes, but I could see the disbelief on his face. So you're saying someone got into your house, left a basket, and then put your own key back on your porch? That's right, and you didn't see anyone? No, he nodded slowly. Well, sir, we don't get much trouble out here. I'll send a car by tonight just to check. When I got back home, I changed every lock and left the porch light on. The woods behind the house looked endless, darker than they should have in the fading light. Around dusk, I was in the kitchen when I heard it, a soft voice outside. Left something else for you. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a shout, just a calm, conversational tone like someone standing on the porch talking through the screen. I froze. The voice came again, closer. You didn't open it yet. I turned off the light and crouched low, peering through the window. The porch was empty. Only the basket sat there again, faintly visible in the glow from the street light. Then came footsteps, slow, heavy ones, crunching over gravel, circling the house. Luna growled from under the table. My pulse thundered in my ears. I reached for my phone, whispering into it as I dialed 911. When the police arrived, lights flashing, the footsteps were gone. The woods were silent, but they found something in the mud. Prints barefoot deep leading from the forest straight to my porch. And the original note still inside the basket, now rewritten in that same crooked handwriting. We're already home. I stayed at a motel that night. The next morning I returned with 2 officers and Gary, the handyman. The house looked untouched, nothing broken, nothing stolen. The officers searched the woods for an hour and found nothing but trees and snow. You got pranksters, one of them said. Probably kids messing with the new guy, but kids don't walk barefoot through the woods in 30-degree weather. Gary pulled down a section of wall paneling in the hallway to check for pests. What we found wasn't a nest, it was a crawl space. Narrow, dusty, lined with insulation and spiderweb webs. And inside, lying in the dark, was the missing magnetic key box. Someone had been living there. The police dusted for prints but didn't find anything useful. They suggested cameras, maybe a motion sensor. Could have been a drifter, Chief Holloway said. Happens now and then. Probably moved on. That night I stayed awake in the motel room, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the voice, the prints, the note. Whoever had been there wasn't just passing through. They knew the house. They knew me. I didn't go back for 3 days. When I finally returned, the house felt different. Empty but not safe. The police had removed the evidence, but the air still carried that scent of old dust and candle wax. I started packing again. I told myself I'd sell it, take a loss, move back to the city, anywhere but here. That evening I sat on the porch one last time, watching the woods sway in the wind. The silence felt heavy, full of memory. As I stood to go inside, I noticed something on the porch rail, a candle, half-burned, dripping wax. Next to it was a scrap of paper folded once. Don't go, it read. We waited a long time for you. I dropped it and went straight to my truck. As I drove away, headlights cutting through the dark, I glanced in the rear view mirror. For a second, I swore I saw someone standing in my kitchen window, tall, still watching. I never went back. The realtor sold the house 2 months later to a young couple. I didn't have the heart to warn them. Some truths sound too crazy to believe. Sometimes evil doesn't break in. It's already there waiting for someone to come home. Never ignore the quiet unease that settles in your chest. It's your instinct telling you the world isn't as safe as it seems. Trust it. Because once something knows your name and your key, it's already closer than you think. I've always liked quiet. It's the reason I moved downtown in the first place. People think downtown means noise, clubs, sirens, traffic. But if you go high enough above the neon and the chaos, the silence becomes almost sacred. My loft sat on the 12th floor of a converted textile factory, all red brick and big arched windows. I gutted the space myself, replaced everything but the bones. As a freelance designer, I could work from anywhere, and I wanted somewhere that felt like it belonged to no one else. The mirror came from a thrift store a few blocks away. It was massive, 7 ft tall, framed in tarnished brass with curling vines etched into the corners. The kind of mirror that belonged in a mansion, not a bachelor's apartment, but I couldn't resist it. The shop owner said it had come from an estate sale out in the suburbs. I liked the idea of giving it a new life. I set it against the brick wall opposite my desk where the morning light could stretch across it. For the first week, it was just furniture, just decoration. Then small things began to feel off. At first I thought it was the lighting. When I moved past it, the reflection seemed to hesitate, a split-second delay like a lagging video call. Sometimes I caught movement in the glass when I wasn't moving at all. I blamed the old bulbs in my ceiling fixtures, replaced them, and told myself to stop being paranoid. But the mirror made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, not yet, more like unease, the kind you get when someone stares too long in a crowded elevator. Still, I kept it. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Designers are supposed to be observant. Maybe I was just too observant. Then the small things started disappearing. A flash drive from my desk, a mug from the kitchen counter, my old sketchbook I was sure I'd left open beside my laptop. I thought maybe I'd misplaced them, but days later I'd find them sitting somewhere strange. Behind the couch, under the bed, once even in the freezer. I was the only one with keys. Sleep didn't come easy after that. I'd wake at odd hours and swear I heard something faint, a shuffle, the groan of a board. My building was old, the kind of place that still breathed at night. I convinced myself that was all it was. Then one night around 3:00 in the morning, I woke up and saw it. My reflection was standing half a second too still. I blinked, and for just an instant, I thought I saw someone standing behind me, a tall shape blurred by the faint light from the street. When I turned around, nothing was there. I laughed too loud just to prove I could. The sound bounced off the brick like an accusation. "Get it together, Ethan," I muttered. "It's just light." Still, the next morning, I ordered a motion sensor camera online just for peace of mind. The camera arrived 2 days later. A sleek black cylinder that could record in low light and send alerts straight to my phone. I set it on the bookshelf facing the mirror angle to catch the full room. I tested it with a few hand waves and watched the playback. Perfect. I slept better that night, telling myself that whatever was happening, I'd see proof soon enough. Around 3:14 a.m. my phone buzzed, motion detected. I squinted at the screen. The live feed was grainy, but clear enough to make out my darkened living room. At first I saw nothing. Then the air in front of the mirror shimmered like heat off asphalt. The shimmer thickened, stretched upward, and began to take shape. A figure emerged, pale and thin, wearing what looked like a hooded sweatshirt. My chest locked. The figure moved slowly across the room, stepped silent on the concrete floor. It walked to my desk, fingers brushing my computer. Then it turned toward the camera. For a full impossible second, it looked straight into the lens. I saw the glint of eyes, the faint outline of a face beneath the hood. Then it moved back toward the mirror, and the shimmer swallowed it again. The room was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat in the glow of my monitor, replaying the footage again and again. It didn't look fake. There was no glitch, no digital artifact. Whatever it was, it had been there. The next morning, I covered the mirror with a blanket. By noon, I called building maintenance. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "I've got this old mirror I want hauled out. It's heavy as hell." "No problem," the guy said. "We can send someone tomorrow morning." When I hung up, I stood in front of the covered mirror listening. The blanket rippled slightly just once, like a slow exhale from beneath. The movers arrived just after 9. 2 guys, Ray and Hector, both middle-aged, both the kind who could lift anything without breaking a sweat. I pretended to be busy at my desk while they pulled the blanket off. I tried not to look, but curiosity won. Without the blanket, the mirror looked different. The glass had a faint haze, as if something had been pressed against it from the other side. Fingerprints, smudges, even a faint outline that looked like a face near the top edge. "Where do you want this?" Ray asked. "Anywhere but here," I said. They laughed. I didn't. They lifted it away from the wall and froze. Buddy." Hector said, "You knew this was back here." Behind the mirror was a narrow opening in the drywall, not a vent or wiring cavity. An actual crawl space about 3 ft deep, 6 ft high. Inside was a folding cot, some empty water bottles, and a pile of food wrappers. A faint smell hit me then. Sweat, decay, and something metallic. My stomach lurched. Ray pulled out his phone. "We're calling security, man. This is not okay." My hands were shaking. I crouched to look closer and saw something small glinting near the baseboard. A lens. A camera lens fixed through a hole in the back of the mirror frame, perfectly aligned with where I usually sat at my computer. Someone had been watching me, not through the glass, from inside the wall. The cops arrived within 20 minutes. They taped off the area and took my statement. I tried to stay calm, but my voice kept cracking. The older officer, a woman named Torres, crouched near the opening with her flashlight. "There's a latch on the other side," she said. "Probably accessed through the maintenance corridor. Looks like someone's been using it for a while." "A while?" I echoed. She nodded. "Based on the wrappers embedding, weeks, maybe months. They dusted for prints, took the camera, and promised to review the building's security footage." I told them about the video I'd recorded the night before. When Torres watched it, she frowned. I'd been saving for almost 3 years. Freelance design gigs, late-night commissions, extra hours in coffee shops with free Wi-Fi. Also, I could afford the kind of place that made me feel like I'd finally made it. When I signed the lease for the loft on Jefferson Street, it felt unreal. High ceilings, exposed beams, big industrial windows that poured sunlight onto my desk. My own space, no roommates, no noise, no compromises, just me. The building itself was old. A 1920s textile factory turned into modern apartments. The kind of place that made your friends say, "God, this is so you." My landlord, Mr. Hanley, was in his late 50s, friendly in that detached landlord way. "Solid bones," he told me when I toured it. "These old floors creak, but that's part of the charm." Charm was fine. I could live with charm. The first week was perfect. I worked during the day, played music at night, cooked cheap pasta, and reveled in silence. But on the seventh night, right after 1:00 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It was faint, like a slow, rhythmic scrape coming from below. I froze, trying to locate it, definitely not from the street. It sounded like something heavy dragging across wood, then footsteps packing. I got out of bed, crept toward the window, and looked down at the street lights painting the empty sidewalk. The building beneath mine, Unit 3B, was supposed to be vacant. I knew because I'd asked about it when I moved in. Hanley had said it was being renovated. I stood there for 10 minutes listening. Eventually, the noises stopped. When I told myself it was the pipes, I almost believed it. By the third night, it wasn't just footsteps. It was packing, deliberate pattern, then dragging again like someone moving furniture and humming, a woman's voice faint, tuneless. I pressed my ear against the floorboards. The sound came directly beneath my bed. My stomach knotted. The next morning, I called Hanley. "Hey, it's Lena from 4B. You said the unit below me was empty, right?" "Still is," he said, distracted. I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Well, someone's down there. I've heard noises for 3 nights. "Ah, these old buildings," he said. "Sound carries. Probably the boiler or the elevator shaft." "Boilers don't hum," I said. He sighed. "I'll look into it." He didn't. That evening, I went downstairs myself. The hallway smelled like dust and paint thinner. The door to 3B was shut, a shiny padlock hanging from it. But when I leaned close, I could hear a faint shuffling sound inside. "Hello," I said softly. "Nothing." Then for just a second, I thought I heard my own voice echo back. The same tone, the same rhythm. "Hello." I stepped back fast enough to hit the opposite wall. My heart thudded. Through the frosted window near the door, I saw movement, a slow flicker of light. I went outside and around to the back alley, hoping to catch a clearer view. The windows of 3B were covered from the inside with sheets of old newspaper taped edge to edge. The paper rippled once as if from a hand brushing it. I didn't sleep that night. The following week, I kept hearing the humming, always around the same time, 1:00 a.m. By the fourth night, I started recording audio on my phone. Nothing, just faint static. Then came Friday. That night, the sound was closer, louder. I could feel the vibration through the mattress. I turned off my lamp and listened. The humming stopped, then a whisper drifted through the vent near the floor. "Lena." I sat up straight. It wasn't a voice I recognized. Not exactly, but it sounded like me. "Lena," it said again, slower this time. My exact pitch, my voice. I wanted to move, but my body wouldn't. The air felt thick, pressing down. Then silence. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation does weird things, but a part of me knew I hadn't. That night, I set my phone up on a chair by the bed, camera facing the floor. I hit record and tried to sleep. When I woke, the sun was coming in. Everything looked normal. I picked up the phone, half embarrassed by my own paranoia. Then I hit play. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then at 3:12 a.m., the floorboards beneath my bed began to bulge upward just slightly. A pale hand, thin, dirt-streaked, pushed up through the crack. The fingers flexed, reaching, brushing the air before retreating back into the dark. I dropped the phone. The police came within an hour. The officer in charge, a woman named Davis, took my statement carefully. "You sure this is your video?" she asked. "Yes." "And you've never seen anyone come or go from 3B? "No, it's supposed to be empty." They forced the lock on 3B's door. I stayed behind them, heart hammering. The air that spilled out was damp and sour. Inside, the apartment was stripped bare. No furniture, no lights, nothing but scattered newspapers and the faint imprint of footprints in the dust. Then Davis crouched near the far wall. "There's a hatch," she said. She pried it open. A narrow tunnel led down into blackness. The officers followed it with flashlights. I waited at the door, shaking. After a minute, one of them called up. "It connects to the basement." They found the crawl space beneath my loft, directly under my bedroom. Inside were a blanket, half-eaten food wrappers, a small lantern, and headphones wired to a vent shaft. Someone had been living there, listening, recording. The part that made me sick was what they found last, a small tape recorder with my voice on it. "Hi, this is Lena," it said over and over. They never caught whoever it was. I moved out 2 weeks later. The landlord refunded the rest of my lease without a fight. I found a smaller place uptown, newer building, more neighbors, fewer shadows. Still, I sleep with earplugs and keep the vents covered. Sometimes late at night, I catch myself listening for humming that isn't there. When people ask why I left downtown, I just say, old buildings make too much noise. It's easier than explaining the truth, that someone learned how to sound like me, how to crawl beneath my life until I almost answered back. The scariest voices are the ones that sound like your own. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, don't wait for permission to protect yourself. Real monsters don't hide in myths. They live in walls, crawl spaces, and the cracks of our everyday lives.